In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am very excited to speak with today's guest. He is a seasoned operator and technology executive with a track record of leading companies through growth and transformation. He started his career in management consulting at Deloitte, where he worked with global organizations on corporate strategy and organizational transformation before making the leap into the startup world, where he moved into a number of go-to-market and other leadership positions in B2B tech, including at Intuitive and Wave. And at Wave, he held roles including Chief Strategy Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and General Manager, helping to guide the business through rapid growth and through its acquisition by H&R Block. Today, he leads a venture-backed proptech company focused on helping commercial real estate manage the complexities of large lease portfolios in a more modern, technology-driven way. He is the CEO of Occupier. David Axler, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And hearing that introduction, it gives me a more clear version that I can tell my family of what I do and what the journey I'm on. So appreciate the way you've introduced that.
Of course, anytime. And hopefully that'll start them listening to the episode too.
Sure.
Wonderful. Well, David, I know you've had a front row seat to a number of kind of company inflection points throughout your career. But one that you shared with me that really stood out was your time at Wave, and especially that period right after the acquisition by H&R Block, where you were given a pretty big and critical mandate. So can you take us to that moment and talk through what was the transformation that you led?
Yeah, absolutely. The acquisition by H&R Block was an exciting time for Wave, for me personally. And after the excitement of the acquisition starts to fade, it is a now what moment. And for us at Wave, it was really about a change in how we were going to run the company and the expectations going forward. We've gone from this venture-backed journey, growth in all time frames at all costs, to really maturing the business. How do we have a more predictable, profitable, and sustainable business model? And really, that was the ask of where are you taking this now that you're you're part of a public company and the stakes are different. And it really was a combination of both strategy change, business model change, and cultural change. And even in hindsight, I'm still not sure which one of those was the most complex because they all played a role together. Strategically, it was about asking ourselves in the new context in which we operate, why do we exist? What is our unique differentiator? And how do we take advantage of our unfair advantages to move forward and create even more enterprise value for the company? And Wave had been essentially a free or freemium platform where we were a back office management tool for micro businesses. And we had offered a free suite and monetized on financial services. And that had led to much success for Wave, but it also meant that from a sustainability and predictability standpoint, we need to ask some hard questions about, is what got us here going to get us there? And ultimately, through a lot of insight, a lot of data work, and making some big bets, we moved towards recognizing that our unfair advantage was that we had built a true operating platform for small business and had the unfair advantage of one of the largest tax prep and accounting platforms behind us. And we essentially went deep on solving for the accounting pain. And it meant a business model change from freemium and fintech to SaaS. And we launched our pro tier SaaS tools so that we could truly solve the core need of the business. And culturally, it meant having now a culture of predictability and a high say-do ratio of not just big home run bets, but we're going to be able to predict where we need to be by the end of this quarter, next quarter. The reporting needed to change there. And my big takeaways from that were the diagnosis stage is arguably the most critical in strategy. That what is strategy? It's an action agenda against the context in which you operate. And that team did an incredible job at being honest and critical about the situation we were in order to make excellent bets. And then the follow through was exceptional. And so the results of moving to profitability, exponential growth, and cherishing and maintaining the parts of the culture that made us so special while recognizing change gave us a new opportunity to almost reinvent ourselves with these new capabilities, cultural aspects. Recognizing that all three of those things needed to work together was really the wave story of going from the startup, the acquired company, to a huge lever in a public company in a relatively short period of time.
There's so much to what you just shared, so I want to take us to a few different places here. But initially, when you were given kind of that mandate of kind of where to take this now, I know you said the diagnosis is the most important part. Can you talk about how you went about that? What were kind of the first things you worked on, and how did that unfold?
Yeah. So we actually started with a very small team relative to the overall organization, both at Wave and certainly in the context of H&R Block. And my thought process towards that was that we needed to make smart, decisive action, but we needed to move with pace. And so I essentially constructed almost a mercenary team of we're going to be able to leverage many of the insights and smart people and data that we have in abundance. But if we're going to try and do this by committee or sticky note, sticky dot voting basis for strategy, it's going to distill down both the quality and the pace is going to suffer. So I made a very deliberate choice to construct a very small team that would lead the analysis, help to ensure we knew what the decisions truly facing us were. What are the trade-off decisions? This is not between good and bad decisions. Those are easy. This is between good and other good decisions that take the company down very different paths. And we had a great data set that really helped us crystallize the true choices in front of us while moving with pace and not doing it by committee. So ultimately, I had the decision that needed to be blessed by the board, but we distributed the insights. So we had a very wide array of perspectives, but we absolutely narrowed the decisioning. And I think that was a huge part of why we're able to make great decisions, have buy-in because folks had their hand in constructing of the narrative, but we didn't restrict ourselves to this voting or consensus-based strategy development. And if I'm, giving the future me or past me advice, is that was quintessential in being able to success was narrowing in on where those decisions lie, even though it felt truly consequential and affecting so many people. That was a key part in being able to move with both the quality and the pace that ultimately made this successful.
Yeah. And I think that balance of, consensus versus action is so important. And I do want to come back to that. But I guess first, who was on that team and how did you decide, which roles to put there and, with the eye towards keeping it small?
So I'll talk about the team and also the broader stakeholder group because they had huge elements to play in that. The team was very small. I had essentially two analysts that were exceptionally talented, and I had a director of strategy who was uh, very quant oriented, but had the visibility across the business to be able to understand how all the various mechanisms in our business fit together to be able to understand a story. We then relied on a larger stakeholder group that essentially had every function in our business represented with key roles. So we had product, engineering, design, finance. We had no sales team because Wave was very much product led in terms of its growth, but our go to market team, which included traditional marketing and DG and brand, and we we use that group to stress test, to source, to validate ideas, and made sure that we had a lot of visibility into the process that we were driving. But we kept that team, that mercenary team, that Navy SEAL team, very tight. I also had stakeholder groups above me on our board, and so we used very regular check-ins around the process that we were employing and tried to get ahead of what are the what are the constraints, what are the assumptions that we have that are ultimately going to lead to this going forward as early as we could. So it was a no surprises experience. We had a very good sense of who the stakeholders were that were going to help us come to a great decision, who the stakeholders were that were going to help us confirm that decision, and then kept the A or the accountability on that process to a very small group.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that, that combination, you talked a lot about data and had, the analysts and kind of the quant mindset, but that there's also decisions that maybe required conviction where you didn't have kind of the full data or, like you said, trade off between two good choices, but which one to pick. I'm curious, were there any decisions that you recall that required kind of courage for you to kind of make the call and put the stake in the ground?
Absolutely. So part of the decisions we were making involved standing up of entire business units that didn't exist. We didn't have historical data to see, well, if we just improve this growth or if we just don't, it didn't exist. It simply didn't exist. We were talking about a new business line that was going to go from zero to a significant part of our business. And what we did was we made very clear what assumptions needed to be true for us to have the type of conviction that we did. And we stress tested those to the nth degree because we didn't have that historical data. I'm a very data oriented person. I love being able to model it, but it was so assumption laden. And so I said, I think being clear eyed on what needed to be true. And is this a compounding bet scenario where everything has to be true for this to be successful? Or actually it's just the combination of some of these being somewhat true for this to be massively accretive for the business. And I think that was critical, that required conviction. And the example there is we were taking something that essentially had been free forever for our customers. And now we were building a monetized, paid platform on top of that. The possibility that that could go wrong had brand implications, financial implications, reputational, and there were everything in there. And so we took a very deliberate approach to understand those assumptions. It also meant we were going to now say no to things that in past time horizons had been a very critical part of our story. And so in the almost in the inverse of we're making a bet on something that doesn't exist, we're also now going to make a deliberate decision to shut something down that had a big part of the story going into it. So part of our financial services, we came to the conclusion that if we are going to be world-class at being able to offer seamless accounting and almost self-driving accounting, it's going to require different set of capabilities, different value props than essentially what becoming a bank would entail. And we sunset a product, and it took a lot of conviction. My name and my picture is on the email to thousands of customers explaining why we're making this decision. And we spent a lot of time putting ourselves in the customer's shoes as to how are they negatively impacted by the decisions that we're making in support of the long-term viability of our business. And we spent a ton of time and effort to make sure that none of our customers were hurt by decisions that we were making ultimately that were in the best long-term. And so we actually made partnership agreements with alternative banking companies to do a simple, free offload. We built the integration into Wave. But anytime you're sunsetting something, that it's been a core part of our customers' lives. People have spent years working on those projects. And so the same set of assumptions of what must be true on the new, it also meant that our team needed to understand the why behind turning something off that had a important part in what got us here. And so there was conviction and courage needed around this whole project because it's incomplete information. You don't have the perfect choice. But by having the assumptions, the why, and knowing who your key constituents are, and starting with the customer and making sure that those are well thought out and managed well, it allows the team to understand, to get buy-in, and then move with the quality that they ultimately did.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you handled the customer part very kind of thoughtfully and with a lot of care, and including right the free users, which I know not all organizations really give it that level of attention. It's actually making me think there's a client that we have that has a freemium product that is very like well known in their space and more well known than the company itself and kind of the overall like corporate brand. But a lot of it was coming from customers that were not their ideal customer. And so we've been going through a transition now around how to evolve that model to get kind of more of the freemium within the ICP, but then also kind of the business model around paid. And there's so many different moving pieces at any given time on that.
And the interesting thing for us was, so the rationale for going from freemium to paid could not just be we make more money. It needed to be more central to that. And part of it was we started to get a much better understanding of what free actually meant for our customers. Our mental model coming in was free is a great acquisition tool. Come for what's free and you'll stay for what's paid. The micro business segment tends to operate much more like the consumer segment than the business segment. So if you think about how you apply value to different tools and services used as a consumer, we spoke to many of our customers, many of our free customers about the value of free, and we had some very interesting findings. Our first assumption was free for them is a deal. What actually was coming back was free was perceived as risky for them. If I can't understand how you're making money off of this, I'm starting to have some real questions about quality. But what was interesting is our quality scores were off the chart. And so when they couldn't find something wrong with quality, now they started to question intent. If I'm not paying for this and it's really good, you must be monetizing somewhere else. What are you
Right.
doing?
What am I missing? Right.
What am I missing? What are you doing with the data? And the answer was nothing. We weren't doing anything with the data. We were monetizing on financial services to the point that the unit economics worked out. But our customers are not thinking about that. They're thinking about the plumber's thinking about his next job. The interior designer's thinking about our client. They're not thinking how does way back money. And so interestingly, when we introduced paid offerings that customers could truly understand how we captured the value we create, it had the opposite effect that we had initially thought about. We're going to see massive churn, and it gave customers comfort of there's now a value exchange that I completely understand. And I'm not questioning the quality or whether there's anything nefarious here. This makes sense to me. And the alternatives don't. And so we saw an outsized amount of success than even our initial models had shown, because we anticipated churn. We just thought, okay, when you're charging for something that was once free, you're going to see churn. And we did to some degree, but far less. And the growth outpaced even our most aggressive model based on the human psychology that was going on, which is, I get this now and I trust this now. And I gladly will exchange value with a company that is a cornerstone of how I do business. So a very interesting experience of free to paid, and doesn't always go the way you think for reasons other than you naturally think are occurring for the customer.
Right. Well, and I love that example because I think just by talking to the customer and talking to enough of them, you learn something that maybe kind of flew in the face of what the understanding would have been, right?
Totally. Absolutely.
Um, so I know hindsight's always 2020, but as you look back on kind of this experience, kind of the overall transformation, is there anything you would say you would have done differently in hindsight?
I mean, I worry about the butterfly effect of if I've changed anything, I wouldn't end up exactly where we're here today. So I, no regrets, certainly. Um, I think there are probably moments where we could have acted faster. And the whole experience I just talked about in terms of the customer providing the direction that we needed to take, getting to the customer faster, more often would probably be the thing that I would change looking backwards. And not for every company, but for a company like Wave, we have so much data. On any given month, we had 250,000 or more small business owners using our platform. And so when you have that much data, you tend to look at the quantifiable side because it gives you objective truths. And it's difficult to go to the qualitative because I'm going to sit and do an interview with maybe a dozen customers in a week mapped against what the data is telling me that 100,000 do. I'm just going to do the 100,000. It was in the qualitative. It was in the story behind the story. It was in what customers were saying that actually got us to our truth as effective and quickly as we could. And that's probably the thing that I would change in retrospect. I'll also say that now, if we would have had the capabilities available through AI and otherwise in 2023 that we have today, I think we could have got the qualitative insight in a much faster, more precise way than perhaps we could have done now. So to answer your question, maybe in an unfair way, I would take some of the capabilities we have today, I give them to my team 3 or 4 years ago and say, let's truly understand the buyer psychology, the user pain, and what's the narrative that they're telling us here, and how do we juxtapose that against the data and the modeling. I still think we would have gone to a very similar outcome, but perhaps it would have been even more expeditious than we experienced back then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's certainly a lot of new capabilities when we're kind of building and running all these motions that we didn't have a few years ago. I think the point about the customer is just so important. And my marketing consultancy works with clients on things like messaging and positioning. We're always so insistent on doing those qualitative interviews with customers because and sales doesn't always want to kind of open their client portfolio and all of that, but once they see what comes back, the value is so obvious, and it's hard. You can't argue with what the customer says, right? You can kind of go back and forth on, do we phrase it this way? Do we phrase it that way? Is this the position? But the customer insights are just incredible to come back. And I think, especially in times like we're in right now, where there's so much changing so quickly, could be very surprised at some of what we learn.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of you and your leadership style. And you touched on this earlier of kind of getting consensus, but also kind of making decisions and making the call. So I want to just hear a bit more of kind of how you think about this and, how do you structure it so it does work well for you and you're not kind of spending too much time on too many opinions before kind of making the call. Talk me through kind of how you work through this.
I think it's evolved over time for me. And I think earlier in my career, I was very much a consensus driver. It felt like the right thing to do. You could point to, look at how many votes we have, and everyone is feeling good about the decision. You'd go through an offsite or a whiteboard and you'd go around the room and you get votes. And I learned that more often than not, that mode, that consensus at all costs was distilling the end answer. It was becoming the thing that was least uncomfortable for the majority of the group to move towards. And probably one of those lessons you can only learn by doing and seeing the results. And it helped form my mental model for leadership of I'm building the team that I have for a reason, which is these are the subject matter experts at what they are great at. I want to build a high trust environment so that I'm not trying to do all the things, and I can give the leaders on my team exceptionally high agency to do what they're great at. And if I'm now taking that agency and just converging it back to a voting mechanism, it defies the whole ethos of what I'm trying to do. So one, how I build the team, I look for folks that are spiky and great on things that I'm not. I don't want to build clones of myself. I want to complement my expertise and my style. Said differently, I know what I'm great at, and I'd much rather work in an environment where I can use my superpowers as opposed to trying to distill them all across the team and be kind of good at a whole bunch of things. And so I build a team that is quite diverse skill set and archetype wise, give high agency. I'm a high trust leader. I don't want to be fact checking and work checking. And I give clear accountability as to who actually owns this. And I think that it's honest and it's fair. Folks understand who is truly driving the decisions here. Why are they driving the decisions? And being able to distinguish between one door and two door decisions. I know it's an Amazon claim, and I've worked with a bunch of former folks from Amazon who with zero worry, I've stolen that concept of really understanding the nature of the decision that we have. And if there's really very few one door decisions that a company will make in any one year, those are the ones where, in all likelihood, I'm going to own the A on, or I'm going to own the decision on. With two door decisions, one that they may have high stakes, but we have an understanding of what do we need to do if they're wrong. I want to make where that decision lives as clear as possible and give folks high agency to make that decision, while as leaders understanding that part of decision making is not just deciding and executing, it is keeping folks aware along the way of the why and the narrative, and pulling in their unique expertise and perspective such that they feel included, connected, but also understand how this decision is getting made. So to maybe put a bow on that, it's building a team that has diverse capabilities and expertise, being clear on how agency works, and other than a very few select one door decisions that are quintessential to the business line or the company, really giving those to the leaders on the team. That's why they're there.
I want to fast forward a bit and talk about what you're building today. So can you share a bit more about Occupier, maybe a bit more about the types of problems you're solving for your customer?
Absolutely. So after the Wave story and the success that we had there, my mental model for the next company I want to join was going to have elements of the recipe that made Wave so special, but also different in the context of a company that I wanted to join that would meet the moment that we're in. So I'll explain what I took from Wave in the company I was looking for. Wave solved an absolutely business critical function. It was not a nice to have. It was absolutely required. It was unglamorous at the surface. So accounting, not the flashiest thing that you can work on. Payroll, maybe even less so. I was looking for things that are hard. They have a high barrier of entry because of the complexity, often regulatory nature. That's a place I like competing. With Wave, we were also competing against two parts of a market that was a really great wedge for us to be in. On one side, you're competing against essentially nothing: Excel, spreadsheets, shoebox of receipts. And on the other side, it's large incumbents who can't move as quick as a startup. So I looked for that in the next role that I was taking on. Different than the H&R Block and Wave context, which have a lot of amazing things going for it. I was looking at where things were going in 2025 and now here we are in 2026, thinking that the way you would build a company would look completely different with AI, with remote culture. I was looking for a speedboat, not a battleship. And I think H&R Block and Wave are this incredible battleship with so much natural advantages. I wanted to go to a place that was small, where the cake had not yet been fully baked, but had the first advantages I talked about. Enter Occupier, which is solving the back office and administration needs for commercial tenants who have been largely underserved for a long time. And similar to the Wave context, the alternatives have been manage all of your lease obligations via spreadsheet or some not built for purpose proptech technology that you can try and jerry rig to manage these massive real estate implications for your business. And it's a small team, about 30 people, that if we have the ingredients of extremely satisfied customers, which Occupier does, if we solve a business critical function, which we absolutely do, we're competing in a fragmented market where these are great folks to compete against. And we have the ability to operate as a speedboat, move fast, build a small team that uses the best in new capabilities and technology to scale in a completely different way than you would even a year or two ago. It got me incredibly energized, and the team is incredible, high integrity, high capability, and it's an easy customer group to wake up in the morning and solve for. Our customers, our commercial tenants, are overburdened by just the sheer amount of detail and responsibility that they have. These are retail locations, large offices, mid-market that will have 20, 50, 100, 1,000 leases, each one with clause data that if you get something wrong, if you miss a renewal, a critical date, a landlord tenant responsibility, you are incurring massive risk and cost to the business. And so knowing that we're taking that pain away through technology, through capability, and through built for purpose solutions, it's very easy to get up in the morning and compete every day to provide value to those customers.
I'm curious what kind of commercial tenants tend to get the most value from what you've built. And then do you think that's going to change in the years ahead? Like, I don't know if you serve more of the leaders versus the laggards. I assume kind of a bit more on that side, on the leader side. Any like behavioral criteria? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So we typically start, we're about 20 or more leases, tend to be more retail oriented and have a dynamic portfolio, meaning that they're adding or removing locations on a frequent basis. So you think about QSRs, health and wellness, where they need to find the best places, and real estate is arguably their largest liability from an accounting standpoint. And the way it's managed has massive implications on the business. So while we're a horizontal solution that we don't just support one vertical, they cluster around 20 or more leases and a dynamic nature to the portfolio. What I'd say is that there's elements of leadership and frontier elements of who were initially the clientele, ones that were more technology forward and technology enabled. That changed about a year or two ago as accounting standards in lease management changed. And now the compliance obligations of commercial tenants have increased. And so finance teams have a new set of criteria on which they need to report. And this no longer just becomes about a slicker, more organized way to manage your leases, but there are audit requirements, there's reporting requirements. And so this has become even more of a critical function that all commercial tenants need to have an answer for that question. And the complexity only seems to be increasing, while the capability to manage it from Occupier standpoint is only getting better. So what used to be a leading frontier innovator, it's much more commonplace to find a solution for this.
I'm curious, where and when in the conversation do you bring in kind of the AI components of the offering? A lot of conversations around, right? If AI feels in some cases like the table stakes or everyone's saying it, how do you truly talk about and the value of the solution? Where does that happen kind of in the kind of the sales and marketing journey for you?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand your market and your buyer, and that AI is not the thing. The problem that needs to be solved is the thing, and AI is a lever on which to solve it. And understanding both what that means for you in the products and services that you're building, and what it means for a customer. Different markets will have different comfort with what AI can do, and the reliability and accuracy requirements of that market have a very large role to play. So when you're buying different technology, you see the 999.99999% uptime. That is almost a proxy for accuracy. There are industries where 98% accuracy is unacceptable. It has to be 0.9999 levels of accuracy. And knowing that dictates not only the solutions and offerings that you have, but what is the value inherent to the customer of AI in and of itself. So in our context, we're in 100% accuracy environment. AI to supplement and make that more effective, efficient, interoperable with the tools is the value prop. But we are not abstracting away human involvement. You've heard the term human in the loop or hands on the wheel. That's a big value prop for our segment, is that we're not fully automating and fully going to AI, but we're giving human beings on our side as account managers, as developers, tools to give those humans greater confidence. And so I'd say it's bespoke to the industry and the solution you're solving for. Think in a different context of the tools that we're using at Occupier. So our marketing team is probably the most AI pilled team I could possibly imagine. And what we get back at times will have imperfect accuracy, but that's okay because we have the ability to soundboard with AI. Did this really get our persona right? Does it have our brand voice? We're training on skills. The fact that it's not accurate the first time is okay because we have seasoned marketers who understand it, know how to make changes. In a world where you are solving for an administratively burdened customer, they do not have the time or the ability to fact check thousands of leases or hundreds of accounting records. It needs to be true. They need to be able to have that high trust. And so understanding the nature of the workflow that's kicked off by that is what's going to give you the sense of where and how do we introduce AI as the value prop? Is it the thing? Is it supplementary to the thing? Or are you getting too far ahead of your skis where let it be the thing that allows you to build efficiently, but it's almost the inverse value prop with the fact that there are humans who are overseeing this machine is the thing that gives your end customer the most confidence.
Yeah, that was very well said. I'm going to a conference in a few days that last year almost every booth had AI plastered everywhere. And I'm very much hoping that this year it comes back to kind of the business value, the problems you solve, the impact and outcomes, because you just walk the trade show floor and everyone sounds the same and you can't really tell kind of where the value is coming from or kind of how it's working.
Well, and there's this phenomenon of Gelman amnesia. I don't know if you've heard this concept before. It's a Michael Crichton concept where you're reading the newspaper on a and it's a section that you know a lot about. So if I'm reading the sports section, for instance, I know everything about the Toronto Maple Leafs. They torture me every year. I could see a editorial about this is the Leafs year, and I could fundamentally know, like, this is not the Leafs year. They are terrible. This person doesn't know what they're talking about. Yet I flipped the section to the art section, and I didn't see any of the Oscar nominated films this year. I could just take that editorial saying, um, Sinners is the worst movie. It has no choice, no chance at winning. Then that sounds probably right. And we have this selective critique based on what we deeply understand. And the same is true with AI. When we get something back that we know the space, we can instantly say, like, this is not right. I would never trust this. Yet in the same working session, we can ask about something that's just slightly outside of our purview and trust it as gospel. And that to me is what's distinguishing. First of all, it's a risk of AI, but it distinguishes those that can create real value versus the AI slop that I think a lot of the tools, unfortunately, help to create and permeate. And as human beings, we have a hard time distinguishing between those two things unless we really understand it intimately.
That's true. Well, and the distinction that everyone you can be an expert and kind of serve that role in the areas that you know well, but then you can be kind of duped like everyone else in the areas that you don't know as well. I think it'll be a very interesting thing to solve for in the world of AI, and I think you just see so much like content slop because things might sound good on face value, but it's being put out by people that have not taken that critical eye. So I think it really ups the ante for every knowledge worker, probably others as well, to really kind of work through that.
And I think it increases the value of authenticity in a world where we're seeing, and you can see it, whether it's on LinkedIn or otherwise, you can see where this is not authentic. And authenticity, customer advocacy, real, real authentic voice, I think has never been more important, and to break through the noise, because there's never been more noise in all of our ears or all of our screens. And so authenticity has become a real currency.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree with that. I'm curious, kind of along these lines, is there anything that you've kind of done, or how you work with your team to make sure that everyone does have that critical eye, and I guess like safeguarding against kind of the risk there with the Gelman amnesia effect?
Yeah. It's a balance, because as CEO, I want to make sure that our company is meeting the moment, and I want to have the tools and capabilities in every single person's hand at our company. And so we are AI maximalist in what we use on a day-to-day basis to help us do our jobs effectively. But we've also put it to the team, which is that this is not a replacement for the expertise and experience that you're here in the first place. So this isn't simply a create an AI generated summary and send it to the team. It does not replace it. And we share every day our best practices. We have a whole Slack channel on what we've done. And by seeing how folks across the business are using AI, not as a replacement for what they do, but as supplementary, it's creating a cultural norm at our company. I'm not a big believer of values on a poster. I'm a believer of the behaviors that you celebrate and you call out as becoming what your culture is. And this is becoming part of our culture, which is not abstracting away your expertise, but using it as a way to help synthesize, help stress test. And so being able to share that in public has been, to me, the best way that we've been both able to have a bottoms up AI approach, but reinforce that you need to be critical. You need to be involved, and you can't simply just hand off the expertise, the taste, the decisiveness that is why you're here in the first place.
Yeah, we're having some interesting discussions on the leadership team around kind of competency benchmarks around AI use and what's the expectation at different levels of a role. And it's just opening up some very interesting conversations and ones we haven't needed to solve for in that way before.
Absolutely. And I'd say that the fundamentals still hold true. So do you have clear outcomes for your team and the individuals? We have all sorts of new analytics to say, like, look how many pull requests were done by Claude this month. Look how many uh, projects and artifacts we've created. It's like me saying, I went to the gym 30 times this month, but not actually talking about the results that I actually did. And so the fundamentals of having clear outcomes, clear goals, monitoring the business and individual performance, it it holds true and perhaps is even more important than ever because it can become very performative of look at all the cool new whiz bang things that we did this month or this quarter, but what did you show for it? Did it move you and the business and your team forward? Or did it become the new shiny thing that took all of your time? Yet at the end of the day, we're no better off. Perhaps we're even worse off now because now we're just confused as to what this does. So it's really on leaders and teams to have their true sense of the why and how do you monitor for that performance? Otherwise, like to your point, it's like, well, now we're considering a whole bunch of new things. Is this even important? What do we measure on? It's keeping the fundamentals in place.
Right, right. Well, I think that laser focus on impact and outcomes, and then kind of a right-sized level of experimentation and tolerance for experimentation that might not go anywhere.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you, it sounds like you're doing a lot with AI within your go-to-market function. Is there an example that you're able to share to help bring it to life for us?
Yeah, I think that what's becoming clear for us is that what AI has been able to allow us to do are things that would have taken perhaps a week or a couple weeks that now can take an hour or 3 hours. I was having this conversation with our head of marketing yesterday, and the example that we were going through was we have a much more refined view of our competitive landscape and competitive analysis by connecting the right tools that we're using. And she's overlaying her expertise to make sure it's right. So it's connected to our CRM, all of our sales call, all of our product usage. We can have a clear sense of how our customers perceive us relative to our core competitive set, mapped against key variables to position us. Old world, maybe only like 3 months ago, that was a quarter-long project to get to the level of quality that we ultimately have right now. That took probably over the course of a week to really make sure it was instrumented properly and could be stress tested and validated to a point where we're using it as a key input to decisions. And the conversation that we had was not so much that what would have taken a quarter took a week, it's that it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened because the priority set that we have meant that we just would not be getting to this. We have a small, lean team and we have pipeline to build and we've got collateral, we've got new website. The competitive analysis is important, but it was not making it above the fold. And so now the fact that so much of that workflow could be built into just the tools that we're using with a seasoned set of eyes on what what is here that makes sense, what is hallucination, and it's pretty excellent. So I think the competitive analysis, a huge piece, synthesis is massive. Being able to recreate when you have a common set of constraints. So we're doing a lot of website development where copy and landing pages, email nurtures, a lot of that can be exponential. So it's build once, deploy many without sacrificing personalization or customization on those things. But it is not a fully agentic experience. This is very much humans involved to make sure that it meets the brand voice, the quality standards. Nothing is being fired off to folks that shouldn't be getting it. But certainly our productivity and our output has increased by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. I couldn't keep asking you about AI and go to market all day long, but in the interest of time, I want to learn a little bit more about you. So, can you talk about, who were you as a child? Did you know you'd be in these kinds of fields? Tell me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I don't think I had any idea that this job even existed as a kid. Um, I grew up in Toronto and went to university in London, Ontario. I'd studied poli-sci and international relations with the thought I would become an international lawyer. I was very into politics and current events and travel, and got into law school. And my grandfather actually, who was a refugee, immigrated to Canada. He said, "You have the opportunity to do anything you want. It's a privilege that you have just based on where you were born and what you've gone through. Are you choosing to do law because it's what you really want to do, or because it's what you think you want to do? Or sorry, what you think you're supposed to do?" And I didn't really have a great answer for that question as a 20-year-old, but enough of a premonition to know that there was probably elements of obligation that was driving me towards law. And what he said is, if you really want to do it, I'd recommend telling them you'll come in a year and go do the job you actually want and see what that's like. And I got a job with an NGO doing international development work in Kenya to get up close and personal with what that actually looked like. And while I was there, to date myself a little bit, this is 2006, the political situation in Kenya got very complicated very fast. Both political parties essentially got on the radio and declared that they had won the election. So no one in the country knew what was going on. And that was my moment to see what international law really does and international lawyers do. And I was less than impressed, to say the least. And a very interesting thing happened while I was there. The phone companies in East Africa, so Safaricom and Celtel, had just released a new technology called M-Pesa, which allowed folks to trade phone credit as almost real dollars. And when the whole country was falling apart, it was this new technology of trading phone credit that was keeping the economy afloat to some degree. And it was just this huge epiphany moment, which was the thing that actually is going to create change and be consequential for me is through technology and business, not through law. And I got on a payphone in Nairobi, I think at 2 a.m, to call my parents, telling them I'm not going to law school because I wanted to go into tech. It freaked them out. Like, what are you talking about tech? You've never taken a computer science course in your life. And I said, no, I think this is a really important step I want to take. I didn't have any idea what that would look like, but I ended up coming back to Toronto. I got into my MBA, is where I joined Deloitte to really understand how to break down a business, but always with the eye on how do I get that first step into tech so that I can be at the intersection of technological change, business, and human impact. And now, too many years later, I think that's what I'm doing, of being able to help find these innovative solutions, change real lives to make impact. And a very windy road at times, unplanned, a lot of luck, a lot of circumstance. But that's the version of how you start with an acceptance to law school and end up with a tech CEO. So not sure it's a blueprint, but that's the story.
Yeah, I love that story, and how amazing to have that kind of an encouragement, like from your grandfather, because I do think oftentimes young adults are mired by the expectations of them, and it's hard to know what do you truly want. And it sounds like that experience in Kenya. I can't imagine kind of all the different things that you must have taken away from that.
Absolutely.
I'd love to ask you a closing question, David. And as you think through all the experiences you've had, what would you say is the piece of advice that has stuck with you most?
The piece of advice that has stuck with me most, and maybe there's some recency bias because I've come back to it a few times, is that it's be you. And that sounds generic, but particularly as you enter leadership or new leadership, it can be easy to think that the right way of doing this is to follow a leadership profile that you've read about or you've seen or you're copying, but to understand yourself and know what the best leadership context of you really is and be authentic to that. We all have some type of imposter syndrome to some degree because we're doing hard things that we haven't done before. And the the sooner you can find your footing as to what that version of you looks like and know what you need to surround yourself with, that's where you hit your flow. And so it's a be you advice.
I love that. I had a similar learning of that. I think it took me some time to get to that earlier in my career. But there's the quote, be yourself because everyone else is taken. That's, tongue in cheek, but I love it. So David, as listeners want to get in touch, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/David Axler, on Twitter at RealAx, or I guess it's X now. And definitely for those that are in the commercial real estate space, occupier.com. And, look forward to speaking with folks that have listened to this episode in the future.
That's amazing. And this was such a great conversation. So thank you so much. And I loved hearing about the transformation that you led at Wave, what you shared about leading collaboratively, but kind of making those decisions and moving fast through that process. And then the discussion we had about the domain expertise and what that looks like in a world of AI. So thank you so much for everything that you shared.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
Great. And thank you too to everyone who's listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, and I'm sure that it did, please pass this along to another leader, because we know that insights like this fuel fresh thinking and help all of us drive real transformation in our companies and in ourselves. So thank you again, David. And this has been another amazing discussion on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.